What would you do if your best friend said you'd ruin her wedding photos? I was arranging roses when Kate called me. Listen, there's been a change with the wedding. You're not going to be a bridesmaid anymore. I dropped the roses. Actually, she continued, you're not invited at all anymore. What? Kate, we've been planning this since we were 12. Things change, okay? She responded like I was a child. Blake's family has certain expectations. You understand, right? She paused. Besides, you don't even have a boyfriend. It would look weird in the photos. Kate, I helped you pick your dress. I planned your bachelorette, which was cute. But this is a country club wedding now. Her voice got softer, faker. You wouldn't be comfortable here. I would have invited you, but you don't like these kinds of places. That's why I'm doing this. She was saying it like she was doing me a favor. Click. She hung up. 23 years of friendship suddenly ended because I didn't fit her new aesthetic. Because Blake Worthington III decided I was too small town for his Harvard buddies. I looked at the roses I'd been arranging. White roses, expensive ones, and cried. 2 hours later, my boyfriend Joseph found me still sitting there. What happened? When I told him, his face went through about 6 emotions before landing on determination. Marry me, Joseph. I'm serious. I've had the ring for months. He actually got down on one knee right there in our kitchen. I was waiting for after Kate's wedding because I didn't want to steal her thunder. But forget that. You want to get married out of spite? No. I want to marry you because I love you. The spite is just a bonus. He pulled out a ring that made my breath catch. It's my grandmother's. She left it to me last year. That's when the plan formed. Joseph, what if we got married on the same day? His eyes lit up. June 15th? June 15th. I started subtle. Called our mutual friends. Did you hear Kate uninvited me? Yeah, because I wouldn't fit the aesthetic. By week 2, her maid of honor called me disgusted. She did what? After everything you've done? It's fine, I said, voice carefully hurt. Joseph proposed anyway. We're thinking a small courthouse thing. June-ish. June? But that's when... I could hear her doing math. Oh my gosh. Word spread like wildfire. Kate started texting frantically. Why are people asking if I really uninvited you? I didn't respond. Meanwhile, I was booking the Castellano Grand Ballroom, the one 3 blocks from Kate's country club. Joseph's mother, who'd been treated dismissively by Blake's mother at a charity function, threw herself into planning with vengeance. We'll invite everyone. 2 days later, Kate texted again. Also, remember that wedding dress your grandma made? It would photograph beautifully. Can I pick it up Tuesday? I texted back once. I'm actually pretty busy planning something for June. Good luck, though. June? What's in June? Wait, you could still make the cookies, though, right? Blake's mom specifically asked for authentic Italian ones. That time I just disliked the message and left it on scene. 3 weeks before the wedding, Kate called 17 times. First, she left voicemails about needing to borrow my grandmother's pearl necklace, then about how she needed money because the photographer wanted a $10,000 deposit. I finally answered on the 18th call. 70 people! She was screaming. 70 people have canceled on me, my dad's business partners, my sorority sisters. That's strange, I said calmly. Must be a bug going around. Wait a second. She paused, and I muted myself while I burst into laughter. Was this you? Is it about that stupid bridesmaid thing? I was trying to protect you. Blake's mom said... Said what exactly? She said you were. She paused. She said you wouldn't photograph well. That you were too ethnic looking. My hand tightened on the phone. I'm Puerto Rican. My grandmother came here with nothing and built a restaurant empire. And you agreed with her? I didn't agree. I wanted everything perfect. It will be perfect, I said. Just not with me in it. The morning of June 15th, my phone rang. Blake's mother. I'd never spoken to her directly before. You vindictive little witch, she hissed. Do you have any idea what you've done? The mayor just canceled. The mayor. For your wedding. I hung up, because it was my wedding day and good vibes only LOL. But as I stood up, I vomited into my hands from morning sickness. Yes, I was pregnant. Except the baby wasn't Joseph's. You see, in a moment of poor thinking, I wanted my revenge to extend beyond a petty wedding. And Blake had some explaining to do. I grabbed the bathroom counter and stared at the test again, hoping the lines would change or disappear. They didn't. My hands smelled like vomit and my mouth tasted awful. The wedding started in 6 hours and I needed to figure out what to do. I turned on the faucet and splashed cold water on my face, trying to calm down and think straight. My mind kept going back to that night 3 months ago at the charity gala. Kate had dragged me there to meet Blake's rich friends, and his mom made another comment about how I should try wearing more neutral colors to blend in better. I drank too much champagne after that. Way too much. Blake found me outside getting air and offered to drive me home since I was too drunk. We never made it to my place. We ended up in his car in the parking garage, and I told myself it was just a stupid mistake, that it didn't mean anything. My phone buzzed on the counter, and I saw Joseph's name pop up with 3 texts asking if I was okay, and did I need help getting ready. He added a bunch of heart emojis and said he couldn't wait to marry me. My stomach twisted up again, but this time it wasn't morning sickness. I texted back that I was fine, just nervous about the big day, which was true even if he didn't know the real reason. I sat down on the cold bathroom floor and leaned against the tub. I I needed to see a doctor and confirm this was real before I did anything crazy. But it was Saturday, and everything was closed. The earliest appointment I could get would be Monday. That meant I had to get through today, through my wedding, while carrying this secret inside me. I looked up and saw my grandmother's wedding dress hanging on the back of the door. She made it herself when she married my grandfather, before she came here and built her restaurant from nothing. The lace was yellowed with age, but still beautiful. I felt like I was spitting on everything she worked for, everything she believed in. My phone rang and Jacinta's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but I knew she'd just keep calling. She started talking before I could say hello, her voice high and excited. She said Kate's wedding was falling apart, that half the guests canceled and the country club was basically empty. She sounded happy about it, like Kate deserved everything bad that was happening to her. I felt sick listening to her celebrate. My revenge plan had worked too well, and now it was spinning out of control. I opened my mouth to tell her I couldn't do this anymore. The words came out shaky but clear. I said I needed to cancel my wedding, that I wasn't feeling well and couldn't go through with it today. Jacinta went quiet for a second and then asked if I was serious. She wanted to know if this was about Kate, if I was letting her win by backing down now. I couldn't explain the real reason, so I just said I needed more time to think, that everything was moving too fast. She tried to argue with me, but I told her I had to go and hung up. Not even 2 minutes later, Joseph called. I could hear the panic in his voice right away. He said Jacinta just texted him that I wanted to cancel and asked what was wrong. He wanted to know if I was having second thoughts about us, if I didn't want to get married anymore. I started crying before I could stop myself. I told him I loved him, but I needed to talk to him in person, that there was something important we needed to discuss before the wedding. He said he was coming over right now and hung up. I pulled myself off the bathroom floor and looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red and puffy. My hair was a mess, and I looked like I hadn't slept in days. 20 minutes later, I heard knocking on my apartment door. Joseph was still wearing his pajama pants and an old t-shirt, and his hair was sticking up on one side. He looked scared, like he thought I was about to break his heart. I made him sit down on my couch, and I sat across from him in the chair. I tried to start talking, but the words got stuck in my throat, and I just started crying harder. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. I finally got the words out. I told him I was pregnant, but the timing was complicated, and I needed to see a doctor to be sure about dates. His face went through so many emotions I couldn't keep track. First he looked confused, then happy, then worried. He asked what I meant by complicated timing. He wanted to know if I was saying the baby might not be his. I nodded and watched his whole face change. The hope drained out of his eyes, and he looked at me like he didn't know who I was anymore. This was the man who proposed to me with his grandmother's ring, who planned our whole future together while I was lying to him the entire time. He asked me to explain what was going on. I told him about the night with Blake, but I left out the part about it being revenge. I made it sound like a drunken mistake that I regretted as soon as it happened. I said I was too drunk to drive, and Blake offered to take me home, and one thing led to another in his car. I told him I felt awful about it, and I'd been trying to forget it ever happened. Joseph stood up and started pacing around my tiny living room. He kept running his hands through his hair, and I could see his jaw clenching. He asked if Blake knew about the baby, and I shook my head. I explained that I only found out this morning, that I took the test right before he called. Joseph stopped pacing and looked at me. He asked if this was why I wanted to get married on the same day as Kate, if this whole thing was about Blake all along. I tried to say no, that the wedding date was about Kate hurting me, about her betrayal, but the words tangled in my throat and came out wrong. Joseph watched my face, and I could see him putting pieces together that I didn't want him to see. I told him the pregnancy just happened, that it wasn't part of some master plan, but even as I said it, I knew how bad it sounded. He kept staring at me like I was someone he'd never met before, this stranger wearing his fiancé's face. He said he needed time to think about whether he could do this, whether he could marry someone who would sleep with another man, and then plan a competing wedding. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away and stood up. He walked to my door and picked up his jacket from where he'd dropped it on the floor in his rush to get here. No yelling, no dramatic speech, just quiet disappointment that hurt worse than anger would have. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and I sat there in my apartment wearing sweatpants while my wedding dress hung in the bedroom waiting for a ceremony that wasn't going to happen. I pulled out my phone and called Joseph's mother, my hands shaking so hard I almost dropped it twice. She answered on the first ring asking if everything was okay with the baby, and I had to tell her there wasn't going to be a wedding today. The silence stretched out for what felt like forever, before she asked in her careful lawyer voice if I was all right, if something had happened that I needed help with. I told her I was fine and hung up before she could ask more questions. The next hour turned into a blur of phone calls that all sounded the same. The venue manager said they couldn't refund the deposit. That canceling day of meant I lost everything. The caterer said the same thing, her voice cold and professional. The photographer actually sounded sympathetic but still kept my money. I added up the numbers in my head and realized I'd just thrown away almost $15,000. Owen called while I was on hold with the florist, asking where I was because they had a massive order to deliver to the Castellano Grand Ballroom. I told him to cancel it and donate all the flowers to a nursing home or hospital, anywhere that people might actually enjoy them. He asked what was going on, and I said I'd explain Monday, that I couldn't talk about it right now. By noon, my phone was going crazy with texts and calls from confused guests. My cousin wanted to know if she should still drive up from Philadelphia. Joseph's college roommate asked if this was a joke. 3 different aunts called asking what happened and if I needed anything. I opened social media and typed out a short message saying that Joseph and I decided to postpone our wedding for personal reasons, and we appreciated everyone's understanding. I didn't mention Kate or her wedding happening 3 blocks away. I didn't mention anything except that we needed time. Jacinta called 20 minutes later and she wasn't sympathetic anymore. She said people were now planning to go to Kate's wedding since mine was canceled, that I was letting Kate win after everything we'd planned. She reminded me about all the people who took my side, who canceled on Kate to support me. I told her this wasn't about winning or losing anymore, and she called me a coward before I hung up. I changed out of my sweatpants into jeans and a t-shirt, leaving the wedding dress hanging in the bedroom like a ghost. I got in my car and started driving without knowing where I was going until I ended up outside my grandmother's old restaurant. Someone else owned it now, some chain breakfast place, but her name was still carved in stone above the door. I sat in my car across the street and stared at those letters. She came to this country with nothing, worked in other people's kitchens until she saved enough to open her own place. Everything she built was real and honest, built through hard work and treating people right. I thought about what she would say if she could see me now, using a baby as a weapon in a petty war with my former best friend. My phone buzzed with a text from Kate saying she heard about my cancellation and asking if I was okay. The fake concern in her message made me angry because she didn't get to worry about me after what she did. I put my phone away without responding and drove to the beach, needing to be somewhere that didn't remind me of weddings or restaurants or anything else. I walked along the shore for hours watching the waves come in and go back out. The revenge plan was supposed to feel good, supposed to make Kate hurt like she hurt me, but instead I just felt empty and scared. The sun started setting over the water in streaks of orange and pink, and I realized Kate's wedding was probably happening right now. Instead of feeling happy about ruining it, I just felt tired. I put my hand on my stomach where a baby was growing, Blake's baby, and wondered what kind of mother I was going to be if I couldn't even be honest with the people I loved. Joseph texted around 9 that night saying he was at his mother's house and we needed to talk tomorrow. He said he still loved me, but he needed to understand what really happened and why. I texted back that I would meet him and I was sorry, knowing sorry wasn't enough but not knowing what else to say. I barely slept that night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling while my mind raced through every possible outcome. Joseph could leave me and I'd be a single mother. Blake could fight me on child support. Kate could tell everyone what I did, and I'd lose my job and my reputation. By the time morning light started coming through my window, I'd made a decision. I needed to tell Joseph the complete truth about why I slept with Blake, about the revenge plan, about everything. He deserved to know who he almost married. Monday morning, I met Joseph at the coffee shop on Main Street, the one where we had our first date 3 years ago. He was already sitting at a corner table when I walked in, 2 cups of coffee in front of him even though he didn't know if I'd show up. I sat down across from him and wrapped my hands around the warm cup, needing something to hold on to. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept, and I probably looked worse. I started talking before I could lose my nerve, telling him everything about the revenge plan and how sleeping with Blake was part of it. I explained how I wanted to hurt Kate for what she did to me, how I wanted to ruin her perfect wedding by stealing her thunder and her guests. Joseph sat completely still while I talked, not interrupting once, just watching my face like he was trying to figure out who I was. His coffee sat there getting cold while I told him about planning to reveal the pregnancy at the perfect moment for maximum damage, about using the baby as a weapon in my war with Kate. When I finished talking, the silence stretched out between us like a physical thing. Joseph finally spoke, and his voice was quiet and sad. He said he didn't recognize the person I was describing, that the woman he fell in love with was kind and caring, not someone who would use an innocent baby for revenge. I tried to explain that I was hurt and angry when Kate betrayed me, that I wasn't thinking clearly about consequences. Joseph shook his head and pointed out that I was still making excuses instead of taking real responsibility for what I did. He said being hurt doesn't justify hurting other people on purpose, especially not creating a whole human being as part of a revenge scheme. I started crying then, ugly crying right there in the coffee shop, because he was right and I knew it. Joseph reached across the table but stopped himself before touching my hand, pulling back like he wasn't sure he should comfort me. He said he needed space to figure out if we had a future together, that he couldn't be with someone he didn't trust anymore. Then he took off his grandmother's ring, the one he proposed with, and slid it across the table toward me. He told me to keep it safe until we knew what we were doing, until he decided if he could forgive what I'd done. I watched him stand up and walk out of the coffee shop, leaving his untouched coffee behind, and the reality hit me that I might have just lost the best thing in my life. I sat there alone for another 20 minutes before forcing myself to leave, clutching the ring in my fist so tight it left marks on my palm. I went to work that afternoon because I didn't know what else to do with myself. Owen called me into his office as soon as I walked in, his expression serious in a way I'd never seen before. He told me that Madeline Stewart called to cancel her account, saying she didn't want to be associated with the drama surrounding my personal life. Owen asked what was going on because he was getting calls from other clients too, people asking questions about my reliability and whether the flower shop was stable. I felt my face get hot with shame as I realized my revenge plot was affecting more than just Kate and me. I gave Owen a simple version of the truth, telling him I was pregnant and my relationship was complicated, that I made some poor choices and I was trying to fix them now. He listened without judgment, but his jaw was tight when he responded. Owen said he was sympathetic to my situation, but my personal life was affecting the business in real ways. He reminded me that we were heading into wedding season, our busiest time, and he needed employees he could count on. I promised to keep my head down and focus on work, to not let anything else interfere with my job. Owen nodded and said he wasn't firing me, but I needed to get it together fast. I spent the rest of the afternoon arranging flowers with shaking hands, grateful he was giving me another chance, but scared of how close I came to losing everything. Tuesday morning, I finally got an appointment with Violet Brooks, an OB/GYN whose office was across town. She confirmed what the home test already told me, that I was definitely pregnant. Based on my last period, she said I was about 10 weeks along, which matched up with the timeline from the charity gala. I asked about paternity testing, and Violet explained that non-invasive prenatal paternity testing was possible now, that they could test the baby's DNA through my blood. She said I would need a sample from the potential father, though, either a cheek swab or blood test from him. I left her office with a stack of pamphlets about pregnancy and a prescription for prenatal vitamins, feeling completely overwhelmed by everything. The reality of having to tell Blake about the baby hit me hard as I walked to my car. I would have to face him and probably his whole terrible family, the people who thought I was too ethnic to photograph well. I sat in my car in the parking lot and pulled out my phone, finding the number Joseph's mother gave me weeks ago for a family law attorney. Reese Yoshida answered on the third ring and listened to my whole situation without any judgment in her voice. She explained my legal options in clear terms, saying I wasn't required to tell Blake about the pregnancy until after the baby was born. If I wanted paternity testing before birth, though, I would need his cooperation for the DNA sample. Reese also warned me about potential defamation issues if I went public with accusations about his family's racism without solid evidence to back it up. I asked what would happen if Blake refused to take a paternity test, and she said I could pursue court-ordered testing after the baby was born. She told me to start documenting everything right now, saving every text and call and interaction with Blake or his family, because this situation could get messy fast. I hired her on the spot, using the money I'd saved for my wedding to pay her retainer fee. Having a lawyer made the whole thing feel more real and more scary at the same time. That evening, I sat on my couch trying to write a text to Blake asking to meet. I typed and deleted about a dozen different versions, trying to find words that didn't sound threatening or desperate. Finally, I just sent something simple saying we needed to talk about something important. Blake responded within minutes asking what this was about, probably worried I was going to cause problems with Kate. I texted back that it needed to be in person, that this wasn't something I could explain over text. He sent back a time and place for Wednesday afternoon, a park halfway between our neighborhoods. I put my phone down and placed my hand on my stomach where a baby was growing, Blake's baby that was conceived out of anger and spite, and I wondered how I was going to explain any of this to a child someday. Wednesday afternoon, I drove to Riverside Park, the one with the walking trails and duck pond where families brought their kids to feed the geese. I parked near the main entrance and walked to the bench we agreed on, my hands shaking as I clutched my phone. Blake arrived 10 minutes late, wearing khakis and a polo shirt like he was heading to the country club after this. He sat down on the opposite end of the bench, leaving a good 3 feet between us, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. He kept glancing around like he was worried someone might see us together. I didn't waste time with small talk. I told him I was pregnant and the baby was his. His face went completely white, all the color draining out like someone pulled a plug. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out at first, just this strangled sound. Then he started shaking his head. He said that wasn't possible, that we only hooked up once and he used protection. I watched him stand up and start pacing in front of the bench, his expensive loafers crunching on the gravel path. I told him protection fails sometimes, that the timeline matched up perfectly with the charity gala 3 months ago. He ran both hands through his hair, messing up his carefully styled look, and I felt this sick satisfaction watching him panic the same way Joseph had panicked when I told him. Blake stopped pacing and turned to face me. He asked if I was sure it was his voice getting louder. An older couple walking past with their dog glanced over at us. I kept my voice calm and told him about the doctor's appointment, about the dates lining up, about how there was no question in my mind. He sat back down on the bench, but this time closer, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. I explained about the paternity test, how we could do it before the baby was born using my blood and a sample from him. I told him it was simple, just a cheek swab or blood draw and we would know for certain. Blake's whole body went stiff. He said no, absolutely not, that he wasn't going to let me trap him with a baby that was probably my boyfriend's. The dismissive way he said it made anger flare hot in my chest. I reminded him that he was the one who came on to me that night, that he followed me out to the parking lot when I was upset about his mother's comments. I told him he knew I was with Joseph and he didn't care. Blake got defensive fast. He said I was drunk and willing, that I can't act like he forced me into anything now that it's convenient. He said I kissed him back, that I got in his car voluntarily, that this was just as much my fault as his. We went back and forth like that, our voices getting louder, neither of us willing to back down. A jogger ran past and gave us a weird look. Blake finally stood up again and said he needed to talk to his lawyer before he did anything. I pulled out my phone and opened my contacts, finding Reese's information. I told him fine, Have his lawyer contact mine, and I read out her name and number while he typed it into his phone. He asked what kind of lawyer I had, and I told him family law, that I wasn't stupid enough to handle this alone. Blake looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, like he just realized I wasn't going to make this easy for him. I stood up and walked away without saying goodbye, my legs shaky but my head clear. I made it to my car before the adrenaline really hit, my hands trembling so hard I could barely get the key in the ignition. I sat there for a few minutes trying to calm down, hating Blake for being such a jerk about this, but also hating myself for sleeping with him in the first place. My phone rang and Kate's name popped up on the screen. I stared at it for 3 rings, my finger hovering over the decline button. But curiosity won out and I answered. Kate's voice sounded weird, kind of tight and formal. She said she needed to talk to me about Blake, that something happened and she needed to understand what was going on. My heart started pounding because I thought maybe Blake already told her about the baby. I asked what she wanted to talk about and she said not over the phone, that we should meet in person. I suggested Thursday morning and she agreed immediately. I told her to meet me at the coffee shop on Maple Street, the same one where Joseph and I had our big conversation. She said okay, and hung up without saying goodbye. I drove home with my mind racing, wondering what Blake told her, wondering if I was about to lose my oldest friend all over again. That night I barely slept, practicing what I would say to Kate, trying to figure out how to explain the unexplainable. Thursday morning came too fast. I got to the coffee shop 15 minutes early and ordered a decaf latte, sitting at a table near the window where I could see Kate arrive. She showed up right on time, which surprised me because Kate was always late to everything. She looked terrible, dark circles under her eyes that her makeup couldn't quite hide, her hair pulled back in a messy bun instead of her usual perfect style. She ordered a black coffee and sat down across from me without smiling. Kate started talking before I could say anything. She said Blake had been acting strange since the wedding, distant and secretive, always on his phone but hiding the screen when she walked by. She asked if I knew anything about what might be bothering him. I realized in that moment that Blake hadn't told her about the pregnancy. I had a choice right then to lie or tell the truth. I was so tired of lying, so tired of carrying all these secrets. I told Kate we needed to have a hard conversation. I explained about the night of the charity gala, about being drunk and angry after his mother made those comments about me being too ethnic. I told her about Blake following me to the parking lot, about us talking and then kissing and then ending up in his car. Kate's face went through so many emotions I couldn't track them all. Shock first, her mouth falling open, then hurt, her eyes getting shiny with tears. Then this cold anger that made her face go hard. She asked if I was serious, if I really slept with her husband. I nodded and told her I was pregnant, that the baby was Blake's. Kate stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. She asked if this was why I planned my wedding for the same day as hers, if I was trying to ruin her marriage before it even started. Other people in the coffee shop were looking at us now. I admitted that yes, part of why I did it was revenge, that I wanted her to feel as hurt and excluded as she made me feel when she was uninvited me. I told her I wanted to ruin her perfect day the way she ruined our friendship. Kate called me pathetic. She said I had become exactly the kind of person her mother-in-law warned her about, vindictive and manipulative and willing to destroy other people's lives. I felt something snap inside me. I told her that her mother-in-law was a racist who convinced her to throw away 23 years of friendship over wedding photos. I said Kate let that woman tell her I wasn't good enough, that I wouldn't photograph well, that I was too ethnic looking. Kate flinched, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she said I didn't understand the pressure she was under, that Blake's family had expectations and standards. She said I didn't know what it was like trying to fit into that world, trying to be perfect enough for people who would always see her as an outsider too. We were both crying now, tears running down our faces while other customers pretended not to stare. I told Kate she chose them over me, that she picked their racism over our friendship. She said I chose revenge over everything good in my life, that I got pregnant on purpose to hurt her. I started to argue, but she was already grabbing her purse and walking toward the door. She stopped and turned back to say one more thing. She told me I got what I wanted, that her marriage was probably over and I should be happy. Then she left and I sat there alone with my cold coffee, watching through the window as she got in her car and drove away. My phone buzzed against the coffee shop table before I could even process Kate walking away. I picked it up and saw Jacinta's name on the screen. The text said Kate called her crying about what I did, about sleeping with Blake and ruining everything. Jacinta wrote that she was done being stuck in the middle of our mess, and she hoped we both figured out our lives because she couldn't handle it anymore. I stared at the message and realized I'd just lost another friend. I put my phone in my purse and walked out of the coffee shop without finishing my coffee. The drive home felt long, even though it only took 10 minutes. I kept replaying Kate's face when I told her about Blake, the way her expression went from shock to hurt to cold anger in seconds. Thursday afternoon, I went to work at the flower shop and tried to focus on arranging bouquets for a wedding this weekend. My hands moved automatically, trimming stems and placing roses, but my brain kept circling back to the coffee shop conversation. Owen walked past my workstation twice before he finally stopped and asked if I was okay. I told him I was fine, but he pointed at the arrangement I'd been working on for 20 minutes. Half the flowers were the wrong colors for what the client ordered. He said I needed to go home and take care of whatever was going on in my personal life before it completely destroyed my career. I apologized and grabbed my things, feeling tears start as I walked to my car. The drive home was a blur. I kept thinking about how I'd managed to mess up literally everything in my life in the span of a few weeks. Friday morning, I woke up with sharp cramps in my lower stomach. I went to the bathroom and saw blood on my underwear. Not a lot, but enough to make me panic. I grabbed my phone and called Violet's office with shaking hands. The receptionist asked what was wrong, and I told her about the cramping and spotting. She said to come in right away and they'd fit me in between appointments. I threw on clothes and drove to the medical building, my heart pounding the whole way. The waiting room had 3 other pregnant women, and I sat there trying not to cry while they all looked happy and calm. A nurse called my name after 15 minutes and took me back to an exam room. She asked questions about the bleeding and cramping while taking my blood pressure. Then Violet came in and did an ultrasound, spreading cold gel on my stomach and moving the wand around. The screen showed a tiny blob with a flickering spot in the middle. Violet pointed at it and said that was the heartbeat, strong and steady. She explained that some spotting was normal in early pregnancy, but I needed to reduce my stress levels immediately, or I could risk complications. The nurse handed me a tissue because I'd started crying without realizing it. Violet sat down on the rolling stool and asked about my support system at home. I opened my mouth to answer and realized I didn't have one anymore. Joseph was gone because I lied to him. Kate hated me because I slept with her husband. Jacinta was done with me because she was tired of our drama. I'd pushed away most of my other friends with my revenge plot against Kate. The nurse squeezed my shoulder while I cried harder. Violet said I needed to focus on my health and the baby's health above everything else right now. She said stress could cause serious problems, and I needed to find ways to calm down and take care of myself. I nodded and wiped my face with the tissue. The nurse handed me more tissues and wrote down the name of a pregnancy support group that met on Tuesday evenings. I left the doctor's office with a stack of papers about reducing stress during pregnancy and a prescription for prenatal vitamins. The instructions said to rest as much as possible and avoid stressful situations. I sat in my car in the parking lot and called Owen. I told him I was having pregnancy complications and needed to reduce my hours for the next few weeks. He was quiet for a second before saying that was fine, but we were heading into wedding season, and he needed reliable staff. I promised I'd still come in and do my best. He said to take the rest of the week off and we'd figure out a lighter schedule for next week. I thanked him and hung up, then drove home and went straight to bed even though it was only 11 in the morning. That weekend, I barely left my bedroom except to use the bathroom and get food. I followed the doctor's orders and tried not to think about everything I'd destroyed. Saturday afternoon, Joseph texted asking if I was okay. I texted back about the spotting and the doctor telling me to rest and reduce stress. He responded an hour later saying he hoped I felt better, and he was still thinking about everything. That tiny message gave me a small spark of hope that maybe we could fix this. I spent the rest of the weekend in bed watching shows on my laptop and trying to sleep as much as possible. Monday morning, my phone rang while I was still in bed. I saw Reese's name on the screen and answered. She said Blake's attorney contacted her over the weekend demanding a paternity test. She explained that Blake wanted proof before he acknowledged any responsibility, which was legally his right even if it felt crappy. We scheduled the test for Thursday afternoon at a medical lab downtown. Reese warned me to prepare for Blake's family to get involved once they knew about the pregnancy for sure. She said his mother would probably try to control the situation, and I should document any interactions with her. I thanked Reese and hung up, then stared at the ceiling feeling sick about having to see Blake again. I spent the week working reduced hours at the flower shop, coming in late and leaving early. Owen gave me simpler arrangements to work on, nothing that required too much focus. Wednesday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Jacinta. She asked how I was doing and said she heard from Kate that I was pregnant. I was surprised she reached out after saying she was done with our drama. I texted back that I was okay, just dealing with everything. She responded asking if I wanted to meet for lunch and talk. I agreed, and we set up a time for Wednesday at a sandwich place near my apartment. Jacinta was already sitting at a table when I arrived. She hugged me and asked how I was feeling. I told her about the spotting scare and the doctor's orders to reduce stress. She said she was sorry for the text last week, that she was just overwhelmed by everything happening. We ordered sandwiches, and she started talking about Kate. She said Kate's marriage was already having problems, that Blake had been distant and secretive since the wedding. Kate suspected he was hiding something but didn't know about the pregnancy yet. I asked Jacinta not to tell her until after the paternity results came back. I wanted to be completely sure before I blew up Kate's marriage even more than I already had. Jacinta agreed and said she understood why I needed to wait. Thursday afternoon, I drove to the medical lab for the paternity test. Blake was already in the waiting room when I arrived. We barely looked at each other. The lab technician called us back together and explained the process. She took blood from my arm first, then from Blake's. The whole thing took maybe 10 minutes but felt like hours. She said results would take 7 to 10 business days, and they'd send them to both our attorneys. Blake left immediately after without saying goodbye or asking how I was feeling. I sat in my car in the parking lot afterward, feeling completely empty inside. This baby was created out of anger and revenge, and now it was tested in a sterile lab like a science experiment. I put my hand on my stomach and wondered what kind of mess I'd brought this kid into before they were even born. I drove home from the parking lot as the sun started going down, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My phone rang around 7 that night and Joseph's name lit up the screen. He asked if we could talk and I told him to come over. He showed up 20 minutes later wearing sweatpants and an old college shirt, looking like he hadn't slept in days. Dark circles sat under his eyes and his hair stuck up in weird directions. He sat on my couch and rubbed his face with both hands before looking at me. He said he'd been thinking about everything constantly, that he still loved me, but he didn't know if he could raise another man's baby. His voice cracked on the word baby, and I felt my chest tighten. I sat down next to him and told him I understood completely, that I didn't expect him to stay through this mess I'd created. Joseph shook his head and said that wasn't what he wanted either, that he wanted to find some way forward, but he needed complete honesty from me going forward. No more lies, no more revenge plots, just the truth no matter how ugly it got. I promised him exactly that, feeling tears run down my face. We talked for hours about what a future together might look like, both of us knowing it would be complicated and difficult. Joseph said he needed to know the paternity results before he could make any real decisions about our relationship. I agreed, and we ended the night with a careful hug, both of us too scared to hope for too much. He left around midnight and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd just had my last real conversation with him. The following week dragged by like walking through mud. I went to work every day and tried to focus on flower arrangements, but my mind kept drifting to the test results. Owen called me into his office on Wednesday and closed the door behind us. He said other employees were having to pick up my slack, that customers were complaining about delayed orders. I apologized and promised to do better, knowing I couldn't afford to lose my job on top of everything else. Owen looked at me with concern and asked if I was okay, if there was anything he could do to help. I told him I was dealing with some personal stuff, but I'd get it together. He nodded and said he was giving me one more chance, but I needed to show up fully, or he'd have to let me go. I spent the rest of the week working extra hours, staying late to finish arrangements and prove I was serious. Tuesday afternoon the following week, my phone rang while I was wiring roses into a centerpiece. Reese's name showed on the screen and my stomach dropped. She told me the paternity results came back and Blake was definitely the father. Her voice stayed calm and professional as she asked how I wanted to proceed. I told her I needed a day to think about it and hung up. I sat in my apartment that evening with my hand on my growing belly, trying to figure out my next move. The baby kicked for the first time and I started crying. This tiny person inside me who didn't ask to be part of this mess. I called Joseph first because he deserved to know before anyone else. He answered on the third ring and I told him the results, giving him the out he needed to walk away from this situation. The line went quiet for a long moment and I could hear him breathing. He finally said he needed a few days to think about what this meant for us. I told him I loved him and I'd wait as long as he needed, knowing I might be waiting forever. We hung up and I sat there feeling numb. Next, I texted Blake with the results and told him we needed to discuss next steps. He responded 30 minutes later asking to meet Friday morning. I agreed and then called Reese to let her know. She advised me to keep the meeting focused on practical matters like medical expenses, future custody arrangements, and child support. She said to avoid emotional confrontations and let her handle the legal stuff. Friday morning, I drove to Reese's office downtown, my hands sweating on the steering wheel. Blake was already in the waiting room when I arrived, sitting stiffly in a chair with his attorney next to him. We barely looked at each other. Reese led us into a conference room with a long table and uncomfortable chairs. Blake's attorney was an older man in an expensive suit who immediately started talking about proposals and terms. He presented a plan for child support and limited custody, making it clear that Blake wanted minimal involvement in the baby's life. I was surprised by how much this hurt even though I didn't want Blake involved anyway. Something about hearing it spelled out so coldly made my chest ache. Reese negotiated on my behalf, her voice firm as she pushed back on the low child support numbers. She got better terms and established that Blake would cover all medical expenses related to the pregnancy. Blake looked miserable through the whole meeting, his face pale and his hands clenched on the table. I realized he was probably scared out of his mind about his mother finding out. His attorney said they'd draw up formal documents and we could review them next week. The meeting lasted 40 minutes and felt like years. I left Reese's office feeling strange, like I'd just sold something important. I got what I wanted in terms of financial support, but the whole thing felt hollow and sad. This baby was conceived in anger and spite, and now it was negotiated over by lawyers like a business transaction. I drove to my grandmother's old restaurant again and sat in the parking lot, wishing she was here to tell me how to fix this. The building looked different in the afternoon light, the carved name above the door worn by years of weather. I remembered coming here as a kid, watching her work in the kitchen and learning how to arrange flowers from the bouquets she kept on every table. She would be so disappointed in who I'd become, using a baby as a weapon in a petty war. I put my forehead against the steering wheel and cried until my eyes hurt, mourning the person I used to be before all this started. That Saturday afternoon, my phone rang while I was still sitting in the parking lot. Kate's name lit up the screen and my stomach dropped. I answered and she started screaming before I could say anything. Blake told her about the baby and she was calling me every horrible name she could think of. I tried to explain that it wasn't planned, that I never meant for any of this to happen, but she talked right over me. She said I deliberately got pregnant to destroy her marriage, that I was a vindictive person who wanted to ruin her life. I kept trying to apologize, but she wouldn't let me get a word in. She said Blake's family was threatening to cut him off financially, and her parents were humiliated by the scandal. The wedding guests were all talking about it, and everyone knew what happened. She hung up before I could tell her that I felt trapped too, that this situation was hurting me just as much as it hurt her. I sat there staring at my phone and feeling sick. An hour later, Jacinta texted asking if I was happy now. She said Kate was talking about divorce and Blake's mother was hiring lawyers to do damage control. The whole family was in crisis mode trying to figure out how to handle the scandal. Jacinta wanted to know if this was what I wanted, if destroying Kate's marriage was worth it. I texted back that I wasn't happy at all, that everything spiraled out of control and I wished I could take it back. She didn't respond after that. Sunday evening, Joseph called and asked if we could meet Monday morning. I said yes, and then spent the whole night lying awake in bed, terrified he was going to tell me he couldn't do this anymore. I kept checking my phone every few minutes like he might text to cancel. By morning, I felt exhausted and nauseous from stress and lack of sleep. I drove to our coffee shop, the same place where we'd had our last big conversation, and found him already sitting at a corner table. He looked nervous, but his face was set in that determined way he gets when he's made up his mind about something. I sat down across from him and waited for him to speak, my hands shaking in my lap. Joseph said he'd been thinking about what kind of man he wanted to be, and what kind of life he wanted to have. He said loving me meant accepting all of me, including my mistakes and this baby that was coming. He asked if I was willing to go to couples counseling with him, to really work on rebuilding trust and creating something healthy between us. I started crying and told him yes, that I would do whatever it took to make this work. Joseph reached across the table and took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. He said we needed to take things slow and there was no guarantee we'd end up married, but he wanted to try. He said the baby deserved to have people who loved them even if the situation was complicated. I squeezed his hand and nodded, too emotional to say much else. We sat there for a while just holding hands across the table, both of us knowing this was going to be hard but willing to try anyway. 3 months passed and my belly started showing through my work shirts. Joseph and I went to counseling twice a week, sitting on that uncomfortable couch and talking through everything that happened. Kate filed for divorce from Blake and moved back to her hometown, and we hadn't spoken since that last angry phone call. I went back to working full-time, and Owen surprised me by being really supportive about the pregnancy. He let me take breaks when I needed them and didn't make a big deal about doctor appointments. Joseph came with me to every prenatal visit, sitting next to me while the doctor checked the baby's heartbeat. We were cautiously planning for the baby's arrival, buying things slowly and talking about what we needed. Blake sent his child support payments through his lawyer every month and never asked to be involved beyond the legal minimum, which was fine with me. My life wasn't perfect or neat like I'd imagined it would be. I was learning to live with the consequences of my choices and trying to build something real instead of something based on revenge. The baby kicked while I was arranging flowers at work one afternoon, and I thought about my grandmother. I hoped I could teach this child about being honest and having integrity, lessons I had to learn the hard way after making so many mistakes.